I was reading the day's news on my computer when I heard a knock at the front door. Since I'm still a city boy at heart, I locked the door when I got home, and it took me a minute to open it. Standing on the doorstep was the sheriff, out of breath from running from his car to my porch. "There's been an accident, Doc," he said, gasping for air. "You'd think that here in Oklahoma, with such a small population and straight roads, there would be very few car accidents, but that's not the case. Once you leave the big cities and get onto the interstate, our highways turn into narrow two-lane roads, and there are too many bridges in need of repair. But people still drive like they're on the interstate, so it's not uncommon for the only doctor in 4 counties to be called to the scene of an accident." "I'll be right there, George. Just let me grab my bag," I said and started to leave. "No, Doc," he said, and the strange tone of his voice made me turn around. "It's Bonnie," he croaked, and I suddenly noticed tears on his cheeks. I felt adrenaline rush through my nervous system and immediately began to choke. "My God, where is she?" I asked. "We have to get there." George just stood there, unable to look at me. "She's dead, Doc. She didn't make it." I had treated many patients with gunshot wounds. They all told me the same thing. When you're first shot, there's no pain. Your body just goes numb. At that moment, I felt as if I had been shot in the chest, and I staggered, trying to regain my balance, until everything around me went numb. "No, this can't be," I shouted. "I can save her if I hurry." But when I tried to get around him and run to the police car, George grabbed me and held me back. "You can't leave, Doc. You can't see her." "It was bad, Doc, really bad." "I'm so sorry," he said through his tears. The rest of the night passed in a fog. Phone calls, quiet voices, people coming and going, snatches of conversation on the radio muffled by static. The only thing I remember is the nervous deputy who stayed with me after George left. And I also remember that, like a bullet wound, when the numbness began to wear off, the pain became unbearable. On that terrible night when the pain became unbearable, I took a vial of morphine from my medicine bag. When the deputy wasn't looking, I injected myself and lay down on the bed. Oblivion came quickly and mercifully, just as I had hoped. I know I acted cowardly, but that night I simply couldn't stay conscious any longer. When I woke up, I immediately smelled food, jumped out of the bedroom, and stared in amazement at the many plates and plastic containers on the kitchen table. Then my brain cleared of the last traces of morphine, and I suddenly realized why my neighbors had brought so much food. "Oh, Bonnie," I exclaimed, sinking into the nearest chair. I had only delayed the pain. Now there was no relief. George returned later that morning and tried to answer the questions he knew I had. "She was driving on Highway 296, coming back from work at Arrow Point," he told me. "We think she must have fallen asleep at the wheel because her Honda crossed the median and collided with an oncoming truck. The truck driver didn't survive either." I tried desperately not to imagine what the accident scene looked like. The next few days passed in a haze of emotional pain, illuminated only by the few memories I had left. Perhaps the most frightening of these was meeting Bonnie's father at the funeral home. He was a big man, the same height as me, and surprisingly fit for a 60-year-old who worked on a ranch. But when I saw him that day, he looked like he had aged 10 years. As he entered the room, he slumped and took small, weak steps. When he saw me, he came over and hugged me. "I'm so sorry," he muttered before bursting into tears. I held him tight and my tears wet the shoulder of his suit. Everyone around us stopped, not knowing what to do. Finally, he led me to her coffin. Of course, I had seen hundreds of dead bodies, but now I was terribly upset to see my wife. The coffin was partially closed, so only her face was visible. We all knew why, but no one wanted to talk about it. That's not Bonnie," I thought, looking at her embalmed face. The Bonnie I knew was full of laughter and life. The face lying there looked like a poorly painted portrait. "Oh, Bonnie," I thought, reaching into my pocket for a handkerchief. "Why did you leave? Why wasn't it me?" When I first moved to Millersville, I was a bachelor, and it seemed like every family in town was eager to introduce me to their daughters who were of a suitable age. I was invited to so many Sunday dinners, church functions, family picnics, and high school soccer games that I could hardly remember them all. And at each one, I was introduced to one or more daughters, ranging in age from 40, I assumed, to 16, God forbid. It would be nice to think that my good looks and charming personality made me such a desirable catch, but anyone who has attended medical school knows that doctors have an advantage when it comes to interacting with the opposite sex. The combination of high income, a comfortable lifestyle, and a respected position in society makes us desirable candidates for marriage. It used to be said that a doctor who can't find a wife is a doctor who doesn't want one. But all these potential spouses may not know that we doctors are warned against chasing women and advised not to fall into the trap at least until we find Mr. or Ms. Right. So I was polite and friendly to the young women of Millersville and even went out with a few of them on several occasions. But I tried to behave very properly and control my animal instincts, even when several young ladies openly offered me their charms. The last thing I wanted was to deal with angry parents in a town where the most popular accessory for trucks was a gun rack. I was so careful that one of my patients told me he heard an upset girl say she thought I was gay. I just smiled, assured him that wasn't the case, and didn't rush things. And then I met Bonnie. I drove 50 miles to Arroyo Point to visit a government agency there. When I walked into the reception area, she was working behind the desk. Have you ever walked under a cloudy sky and suddenly found yourself in a ray of sunshine? That's exactly how I felt when I saw her. I don't think I stumbled as I approached the desk, but I'm not sure because my brain clearly wasn't in control of my body and, as it quickly became apparent, my mouth. I'm here to see Mr. Rogers. Um, I stammered. I know who you are, she snapped. Then she turned away from me and walked away rudely. I had no idea what I could have done to offend her, but I was determined to find out and make it right. A week later, I made an appointment to see Mr. Rogers. When I walked into the lobby, she rolled her eyes in disgust when she saw me. When I showed up again the following week, she looked at me in surprise. Why are you here? Mr. Rogers isn't working today, she said. I'm not here to see him, I replied. I was hoping you would have lunch with me. You drove 50 miles to have lunch with me? She asked in amazement. Blushing, I nodded. She rolled her eyes again. Well, okay, she said reluctantly. That's how it all started. I was surprised to learn that she was Richard Miller's daughter. I thought the county commissioner would brag about his only daughter like other influential people in the county. And maybe he did. But I realized that Bonnie was an independent person and not easily persuaded. I know this because I courted her for over 6 months before she agreed to a serious relationship. What's more, even after we were married, she refused to quit her job at Arrowpoint. She told me she had achieved her position on her own without her father's influence, and she was proud of that. I agreed as if I had a choice, but now I wished with all my heart that she didn't have to drive 50 miles to work every day. Despite all her independence, when we got engaged, Bonnie turned out to be surprisingly conservative sexually. She told me straight out that she wouldn't have sex with me until we were married. I thought her position was terribly old-fashioned, even for rural Oklahoma, but there was nothing I could do to change her mind. Besides, by that time I was so deeply in love with her that it didn't matter anymore. On our honeymoon, I took her to the Virgin Islands, and we had sex for the first time in a secluded hotel on the island of St. Croix. It wasn't Bonnie's first time, which surprised me, but I decided not to ask, and she didn't offer an explanation. I remember the last night before we had to leave the island. We had sex, and then she went out onto the balcony to look at the ocean. When I joined her, the moonlight illuminated the tears in her eyes. Are you okay? I asked, worried. She turned and pressed herself against me. It's been so hard for me, she whispered. I'll never forget this until the day I die. Tears of happiness welled up in my eyes. Now, at the funeral home, those memories wouldn't leave me, and I was powerless to shake them off, even though they caused me so much pain. In medical school, we were taught to empathize with patients, but never to sympathize with them. Empathy is important, we were told, but if you start sharing your patient's emotions, your effectiveness as a doctor will decline. Besides, you might go crazy carrying all that grief inside you. As people filed through the waiting room to offer their condolences, I realized how little comfort their words brought me. We're so sorry for your loss, they would say, and I knew their grief was nothing compared to mine. She was such a devoted wife, they said, and I knew they had no idea how devoted she was. She's in a better place now, someone said, but all I could think about was that it certainly wasn't better for me. Finally, we all stood at the grave while the Baptist minister said the last words before the coffin was lowered into the rich brown earth forever. Trying to hold back my tears, I looked around at the other mourners. I thought that of all of them, the only one who felt her loss as deeply as I did was her father. The old man leaned on Richard Jr. His reddened eyes were fixed on the spot where his only daughter's remains lay. When the funeral was over, the crowd began to disperse. I heard one of the county commissioners say, I hope Richard will be all right. Bonnie was a real daddy's girl. She would have done anything for him, and he wanted everything for her. A loss like this could kill him. I looked back at her father as he walked away from the grave and thought that the commissioner's fears might well be true. Given my own pain, I wondered if her loss would kill me. An elderly woman approached me and patted my arm. "I hope you won't leave us," she added. Before I could say anything, her husband called out to her, "Martha, what are you talking about?" "Of course, Doctor, Robertson isn't leaving Millersville." I hadn't even thought about leaving. In fact, I hadn't thought about anything except how I was going to get through Bonnie's funeral. In any case, it was a strange remark, especially at that moment. But it reminded me of how I had ended up in Millersville in the first place. I had always wanted to be a doctor. It's funny, I don't remember what sparked my interest in medicine, but when people asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I always said a doctor. When you're young, all professions seem the same and all careers seem equally achievable. Over time, you begin to understand how complex the interplay is between intelligence, skills, interests, abilities, and dozens of other factors necessary for a successful career in any profession. And once all those factors are sorted out, there's one last hurdle: the cost of education. Few professions are more expensive than medicine. After crunching the numbers, I figured that by the time I was ready to start practicing, I would have about $250,000 in debt. As if that weren't enough, my father's heart attack while I was in college dealt what seemed like a fatal blow to my hopes of becoming a doctor. But this is a great country, and it has a great program to address this problem: the National Health Service Corps, NHSC. The NHSC was created to address two problems. The first is excessive specialization. Every medical student knows that specialization can be lucrative. As a result, we have a shortage of doctors in less profitable fields such as internal medicine, family practice, pediatrics, and so on. The second, and in some ways even more acute problem, is the shortage of doctors in rural areas of the country, where medical care is poor. In Manhattan, it's hard to walk a block without coming across a doctor. But if you go to the center of the country, you'll have to drive a day or more to find a doctor. The NHSC informed me that if I agreed to become a primary care physician and was willing to move to an underserved area, the government would forgive the enormous debts I would accumulate, provided that I remained in that area for a long time. So I made an early commitment that allowed me to get the support I needed during medical school, internship, and residency. Essentially, I sold my first few years of practice to the NHSC in exchange for tuition and expenses. It was a compromise I was willing to make. I won't get rich, but I will be able to fulfill my dream in a place where my services are truly needed. I gladly signed the contract. In my second year of residency, Oklahoma became a possible place for me to work. I had never been to Oklahoma before, and the idea seemed romantic to me. Would it be difficult to spend the next few years seeing patients amid swaying wheat fields, corn as tall as an elephant, and prairies where brave pioneers once lived? That's how I ended up in Millersville. When I met Richard Miller, the head of the Miller County Commission, he made it clear that his town wanted much more than 4 years of my work. His family had lived here in north-central Oklahoma since the Great Land Rush of 1889, which explains the name of the county and the town. Richard wanted to preserve the town for his son and grandchildren. A few years ago, there was another NHSC doctor in Millersville, but he didn't stay long. For Millersville's leadership, it was a real disaster. "A town without a doctor is a dying town," Richard told me. "Couples are afraid to start families, people start to drift apart, and the town slowly declines. We don't want that to happen here." They certainly made my job easier. The office was already waiting for me, and I was surprised at how well equipped it was. But before I had a chance to admire my new office, Richard showed me the house where I would be living rent-free. It was a beautiful 2-story Victorian house, recently renovated. And when I objected that it was too big for my needs, Richard just smiled and said I would get used to it in time. I was attracted not only by the great privileges they offered me, but also by all the little things that made me feel welcome. On the day I arrived in Millersville, I became a celebrity. It seemed that everyone in town knew and loved me, and everyone tried to nod and smile when they passed me on the street. County commissioners began consulting me on all sorts of issues and never stopped praising my thrifty advice. Overnight, I went from being a failing medical student to a very important person. Of course, I understood what they were trying to do: create every possible incentive for me to stay there even after fulfilling my obligations to the NHSC. So when they started introducing me to their daughters, I had no illusions. Good parents in Millersville knew that the bonds of marriage would be much stronger than any other incentive they could offer me to stay. But even though all that was obvious, I couldn't help but be moved by the sincerity of these people, their obvious warmth, trust, and affection. Of course, they needed me to stay, but I also believed that they were genuinely happy that it was me and not someone else, and that was nice. And when I met Bonnie, all other considerations faded into the background. The fact that I had fallen in love with the only young woman in town who didn't throw herself at me somehow reassured me. Her reserve convinced me that when she finally agreed to a committed relationship with me, I had truly won her heart. When she finally agreed to marry me, all my doubts about staying in Millersville disappeared. When we finally got married, I realized that life couldn't get any better. Until the night when everything went wrong. For a week after the funeral, people kept bringing food to my house. I knew it was a traditional way of showing concern, but I was touched nonetheless. It was as if my friends and neighbors wanted to make sure I was fed, afraid that I wouldn't be able to feed myself during my time of grief. That simple gesture meant so much more to me than the ritual words of condolence. After the funeral, I took a week off work and all my appointments were magically rescheduled. This was fortunate because I couldn't work with patients, but I didn't sit around doing nothing. I realized that death brings with it a surprisingly long list of things that need to be taken care of, and I worked diligently on them. Each task was excruciatingly painful, but I wanted to get rid of these razor-sharp reminders as quickly as possible so they wouldn't continue to torment me. One of the last items on my list was a visit to the sheriff's office. It was obvious that George wasn't happy to see me, but he invited me to sit down in the chair across from his desk. Dr. Robertson. Mark, are you sure you want to do this? The more details you will learn, the harder it will be for you. Thanks, George, but I have to know what happened. I can't live without knowing. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair and folded his arms. As I said, we can't know for sure what happened. We assume she must have fallen asleep at the wheel because the road where the accident occurred is straight and flat. Her car crossed the median and didn't brake. She didn't brake because there were no skid marks on the highway. We estimate that they were traveling at about 65 miles per hour. I shuddered. The kinetic energy of such a collision would have been catastrophic. Go on, I said. What about Bonnie? He didn't take his eyes off the papers. She was wearing her seatbelt and the airbag deployed as it should have. But at the speed they were traveling, the car was partially crushed, and she was trapped in the wreckage. I tried desperately not to think about what it must have looked like. My beautiful wife smashed like a bird hitting a glass window. But I should have known better. So she was trapped in the car with multiple injuries. Do we know what caused her death? Was it shock? I whispered. George lowered his head even further. Somehow, as a result of the accident, her left arm was severed. She bled to death, Doc. He paused. If it's any consolation, it appears to have happened very quickly. A diagram from my anatomy class came to mind, and I saw the brachial artery branching off from the carotid artery and running down the arm. No, I thought, it couldn't have been long. What about the other car? I asked. It was a Dodge pickup truck. The driver was probably killed instantly. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Who was he? I asked. His name was Taylor Johnson. He was a farmer in Noble County, east of here. His wife said he was hunting white-tailed deer at the Black Kettle Wildlife Refuge. He was probably on his way home when the accident happened. I shook my head. The name meant nothing to me. One more thing, George, I said. I'd like to see the autopsy report. Doc, are you sure? Please, I said. I'm a doctor. It's the only way to understand what happened. He stood up and walked over to an old metal filing cabinet. Automation wasn't widespread in this part of Oklahoma. It's just part of the job, Doc, he explained. There was no question about the cause of death. I glanced at the report. George was right. The coroner had only examined the body. Her left arm was missing, as I had suspected, but it was painful to learn of the multiple rib fractures and a crack in her sternum. Although the report didn't mention it, I was sure she must have had extensive internal injuries. There was also a skull fracture. The fractures to her hip and pelvis were accidental. In total, she had half a dozen potentially fatal wounds. But the severed brachial artery ensured that she was already dead by the time the paramedic arrived. Strangely, after writing the report, I felt a little better. I thought she had probably lost consciousness from the blow to the skull. If so, she didn't suffer. That was some small consolation. Another consolation was the realization that there was nothing I could have done to help her, even if I had made it to the scene of the accident. I doubt she would have survived even if she had been hit in front of a large city hospital. I returned the sheet to George and went home. Oddly enough, the autopsy report gave me a greater sense of closure than her funeral had. The next week, I returned to work. There was nothing more I could do for Bonnie, so I decided it was time to focus on the living. On Thursday afternoon, I had no patience, and I was surprised when the nurse told me that Hillary Johnson was in the waiting room and wanted to see me. A quick check of our files showed that she had never been there before, so I took out a blank form to prepare for the examination. A rather attractive woman of my age entered the office. I offered her a chair next to the couch, but she remained standing, her arms crossed and staring intently at me. Her behavior seemed a little disturbing, but I tried to begin the examination. "How can I help you, Mrs. Johnson?" I asked in my usual manner. She lowered her arms, clenched her fists, and her face began to redden. "Can you tell me why your wife killed my husband?" she whispered, then covered her face with her hands and began to sob. Oh my God, I thought. This must be the wife of the man who was driving the pickup truck. Part of me wanted to go around the table and comfort her, and part of me wanted to hide from her obvious pain. But her words reminded me of my own pain, and I couldn't do anything but sit there, paralyzed. After a few long minutes, she seemed to regain control of herself, and at the same time, I emerged from the fog of memories that had enveloped me. I spoke first. "I'm so sorry about your husband, Mrs. Johnson. I'm still trying to come to terms with my own loss." Her expression softened a little when she seemed to realize that I was suffering too, but she was clearly still in pain. I just don't understand how she could have been so careless. If she had just stopped and taken a nap, just stopped to rest for a little while. "I don't understand either," I told her sincerely. "She drove at the same time every night. I keep thinking about it, wishing she had called me to pick her up just so that this wouldn't have happened." I tried, but I couldn't keep the pain out of my voice. Mrs. Johnson must have sensed this because her tone softened even more. "I know it's not your fault. If you're honest with yourself, it probably wasn't her fault either. I was just in so much pain and felt like I had to come. Now I regret coming. I can see how much you're suffering." "It's okay, Mrs. Johnson," I said. "We're both looking for answers where there are only questions. We're both looking for a way to fix what happened, even though we know it's impossible. It's human nature to be angry at everyone involved in a tragedy, even if they were powerless to prevent it." Then my professional training kicked in. "Have you been able to sleep since the accident?" I asked quietly. Quietly. Gently. When she shook her head, I quickly wrote her a prescription. "If you'd like, you can take one of these before bed. Just don't take it with alcohol." She thanked me and got up to leave after I handed her the prescription. Before she left, I asked her, "Please stay in touch, Mrs. Johnson. I'd like to know how you're doing." She nodded gratefully, and after she left, I felt better for having been able to help, even a little. But over the next few days, I kept thinking about her visit. Her questions haunted me, even though I knew there were no answers. Sometimes bad things happen to good people for no reason, but knowing that doesn't mean accepting it. And the fact that I couldn't answer any of Mrs. Johnson's questions was even harder to accept. If nothing else had happened, I think time would have gradually healed my wounds. But I couldn't afford that luxury. A week later, Miss Nicole Claiborne from some insurance company in Oklahoma City made an appointment to see me. She made it clear that her visit was not related to sales, but she didn't reveal her purpose in advance. She simply said she needed to talk to me about my late wife. I reluctantly agreed to meet with her, prepared for my wounds to be reopened. When Miss Claiborne arrived at the appointed time, I saw an attractive young woman in a business suit that would have been considered conservative if not for the slit in her skirt, which was higher than I expected. I found it somewhat offensive that she had dressed like that to meet a man still mourning his wife, and I tried not to look her in the eye. "Dr. Robertson," she began, "I'm here because your wife was insured under a life insurance policy taken out by her father. You are listed as the beneficiary. Were you aware of this?" "No," I replied. "I wasn't." Miss Claiborne nodded. "The policy includes a double indemnity clause which comes into effect in the event of accidental death. In this particular case, the face value of the policy was $100,000. So if the claim is accepted, the payout will be $200,000. She looked at me intently as she spoke. When I didn't respond, she continued, Naturally, in accordance with our standard procedure in such cases, we always investigate all cases of premature death before paying out a claim. I don't see what there is to investigate, I replied coldly. The police said she must have fallen asleep at the wheel before the accident. I don't see anything more obvious than that. She sat there for a few minutes, then crossed her legs provocatively and unbuttoned her skirt. I ignored her display. $200,000 is a lot of money. What are you going to do with it? She asked sharply. I was angry at this woman for her inappropriate display and tone of questioning. I was angry at myself for the tears that were welling up in my eyes despite my attempts to maintain my composure. Miss Claiborne, the woman I love died in a terrible accident just a few weeks ago. Money is the last thing on my mind. If you have no further questions, would you please leave me alone? She spread her legs and sat down straight in her chair, carefully adjusting her skirt to hide what she had so immodestly displayed just a few minutes earlier. Her demeanor changed completely, and an apologetic expression appeared on her face. Dr. Robertson, I deeply regret my questions and the way I behaved. Please accept my sincere apologies. Dr. Robertson, I've been investigating insurance cases longer than you think. During that time, I've learned to use certain distraction tactics. She leaned forward and adjusted the slit in her skirt to better assess the people I'm dealing with. Some of them turned out not to be who they claimed to be, and their reactions to my diversionary tactics helped me uncover the truth. In your case, I am convinced that you are a grieving widower who sincerely loved your late wife, and I sincerely regret your loss. I think I understand, I said slowly. But why did you involve me in all this? There can be no doubt about what happened. As I spoke, I remembered Hillary Johnson's visit and felt uneasy. The investigator leaned toward me. Dr. Robertson, another thing I've learned on this job is to trust my intuition. My intuition tells me that you are a good man who wants to know the truth about what happened to your wife, so I'm going to be very frank with you. But first, let me warn you. If necessary, I will consider unpleasant possibilities. If I say something that offends you, please hear me out. I didn't know your wife, so I would ask anyone in your situation the same questions. Please don't take it personally. I nodded doubtfully. Logically, an investigator should consider all sides of a situation, but in this case, I still couldn't see more than one side. She quickly showed me how I was wrong. Dr. Robertson, I told you that I trust my intuition. My intuition won't let me rest. How could your late wife have fallen asleep at the wheel before the accident? I don't believe she fell asleep. I was shocked. If she didn't fall asleep, what else could have caused her to veer into oncoming traffic and crash into a truck? Are you suggesting she was drugged? I asked incredulously. Absolutely not, she replied quickly. On the contrary, I don't think she was in that state. I looked at her curiously. How do you know that? I asked. Maybe she had a very hard day at work and was unusually tired. Maybe she didn't eat anything for lunch and her blood sugar dropped sharply. There are many reasons that could have caused her to lose consciousness just before the accident. When was the last time you were in Arapointa? She asked. A long time ago, I replied. At least a few months ago. I don't remember exactly. She nodded. 2 months ago, Miller County began repairing the bridge over the river between Arapoint and Millersville. Because of the repairs, all vehicles crossing the bridge had to slow down to 35 miles per hour and then make a sharp lane change in the middle of the bridge. Your wife would have had to be alert and careful to get across that bridge. That doesn't mean she couldn't have fallen asleep after crossing the bridge, I objected. It's not impossible, she admitted, but the accident happened only a mile from the bridge. At the speed she was going, that's only about 60 seconds. I don't think she would have fallen asleep within a minute of successfully changing speed and adjusting the steering wheel. I sat silently. Bonnie drove that route every evening after work. She should have been used to driving in those conditions, and I wondered again what could have gone wrong after so many years. What Nicole Claiborne had told me was extremely disturbing. What about mechanical failure? I finally asked. Could something like a bump or a steering problem have caused her car to veer into oncoming traffic? Yes, it could have, she replied calmly. But I've already been to the junkyard to examine your wife's car. The tires were intact, and the damage to the suspension and steering did not appear to be related to the accident. But maybe, I began, but she raised her hand. More importantly, she continued, we were able to retrieve the onboard computer from her car, which accurately recorded everything that happened in the last few seconds before the collision. When her Honda was traveling at 64.8 miles per hour, The steering wheel was turned to the left, causing the car to veer into the other lane. Then the steering wheel was straightened. The brakes were not applied. I leaned back in my chair with my mouth open. It sounded as if Bonnie had deliberately steered her Honda into the oncoming truck. How could this have been an accident? But if it wasn't an accident, the only other possibility was suicide. But she had no reason to kill herself, at least not that I could think of. Miss Claiborne's voice interrupted my thoughts. Did you or your wife know Taylor Johnson? She asked quietly. I'd never heard of him before the accident, I replied, and Bonnie never mentioned him. Besides, as far as I know, he lived in Noble County, east of here, so it's unlikely she would have met him. Why do you ask? Now her face looked tired. You're not going to like this, but I have to consider other possibilities. What if it wasn't an accident? What if she deliberately tried to kill not only Jason Taylor, but herself? The thought made me gasp. That's impossible, I sighed. Why would she do that? I can think of at least 3, she said quietly. She raised her hand and curled her index finger. First, Taylor Johnson was her mortal enemy, and she felt she had to sacrifice her life to protect her family from that threat. She touched her middle finger. The second option is that she and Mr. Johnson were lovers, and she killed him and herself in a fit of jealousy. Raising her ring finger and looking away, she added, or if they were lovers, she could have been trying to make sure no one found out she was pregnant with his child. I tried to remain calm and rational, but her last suggestion was too serious. Damn it, that's not true. Bonnie loved me, and she wasn't pregnant. What do you want, to exhume her body and perform a full autopsy? I won't allow it. She quickly approached me, knelt down, and took my hands. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. I'm not your enemy, and I don't like that I have to be so cynical and suspicious of people. Please forgive me. Although her assumptions were outrageous, her apology softened my anger. All right, Miss Claiborne. I think you're just doing your job. Still remorseful, she looked at me. Please call me Nicole. Can I call you Mark? If we're going to figure out what really happened, it will help. Okay, Nicole, I said, but I still think you're wrong about Bonnie. In any case, I agree. I don't think any of those 3 scenarios are correct. First, all 3 assume that Bonnie knew Taylor Johnson would be on the highway at that exact time. However, Mrs. Taylor told me she didn't know when her husband would be back from hunting. As for Bonnie, she left Arrowpoint at her usual time, so she obviously didn't arrange to meet Johnson. Furthermore, I checked her cell phone records, and she didn't make or receive any calls in the last few hours before the incident, so I don't understand how she could have arranged to meet him. So it was just a coincidence. A chance encounter? I asked. Possibly, Nicole admitted. But that still leaves us with what looks like a deliberate attempt to crash into Johnson's truck. Maybe we're looking at this the wrong way. Maybe Taylor Johnson wanted to kill Bonnie? I asked. I've thought about that, she replied. But how could he have pushed her into his lane? She stood up. Mark, I know I've upset you and I apologize again. But the thing is, there's nothing about this case that I don't understand. And I can't leave it alone until I get to the bottom of it. I sank back into my chair. Miss Claiborne, Nicole, I have to admit that since the accident, I've had my doubts too. I need to know what happened. She handed me her business card. If you remember anything that might shed light on this case, call me anytime. She looked at me sympathetically. Call even if you just need someone to talk to. Then she turned and left my office. I thought I was confused before, but now the thought that my late wife had taken some mysterious secret with her to the grave was a new wound that had not yet healed. It was bad enough that Bonnie had died in a tragic accident. Nicole's questions filled my mind with insidious suspicions. Of course, none of these scenarios could be true, but the multitude of unanswered questions was enough to drive me paranoid. That night, before going to bed, I took one of my sleeping pills. The next day was Saturday, and my office was closed on Saturday afternoons. After seeing my last patient, I got in my car and drove to Arrowpoint. Until now, I had avoided that place because I couldn't bear to see where my beautiful Bonnie's life had been cut short. However, now I felt I had no choice but to see everything with my own eyes and try to understand what had happened as much as possible. Although I had been living in Oklahoma for almost 2 years, I still wasn't used to the distances. Bonnie didn't think much of driving from Millersville to Arrowpoint and back every day. It was routine for her, but it would have been a real burden for me. I guess growing up on the prairie changes your perspective. But if that road was so familiar to her, I wondered, What was different about that terrible night? What could have led to her death on that long, straight stretch of highway? I deliberately ignored the spot where I figured the accident had happened and drove to Arrow Point. I wanted to drive the same route she had, so I stopped by Bonnie's office, turned around in the parking lot, and headed out onto the highway. After a while, I came to the bridge and immediately saw that Nicole had been right. No one could drive safely here at high speed. Unless you were completely alert and attentive, you would most likely crash into one of the concrete barriers when changing lanes. As soon as I got onto the bridge, I pressed the gas pedal and accelerated to 65. I looked at my watch and noted the time on the speedometer when 60 seconds had passed. Then I stopped, made sure the road was clear, and turned around to return to the scene of the accident. It seemed to me that it would be very difficult to fall asleep in such a short time. Pulling over to the side of the road, I got out of the car and began to look around. Judging by all appearances, the tow truck drivers had done a good job. The only traces of the accident were shards of broken glass and plastic, as well as a few strips of chrome body trim. Then something in the grass caught my eye, and as I got closer, I discovered a small wooden cross with the words Bonnie Miller, deceased, and a date. I don't know who put up the cross, but when I saw it, I could only think of the girl I had met in Arrow Point. Tears welled up in my eyes again. After a while, I pulled myself together and with a heavy heart, headed back to Millersville. After examining the accident site, I missed Bonnie more than ever. And at the same time, I was more anxious than ever. Now I was sure that much of what I knew about her accident couldn't be true. "Oh, Bonnie, what happened?" I asked helplessly. Over the next 2 weeks, I replayed the trip to Arrowhead and back over and over in my head. I wasn't sure if I was paying tribute to my wife or looking for clues to solve the mystery, but I couldn't do either. After several fruitless trips, I decided I needed to take a different approach. I drove to the office where Bonnie worked, parked, went inside, and asked to speak to Mr. Rogers, her boss. When I gave my name, he appeared very quickly. I guess being the only doctor in 4 counties is a privilege. Mr. Rogers offered his condolences, then chatted with me over a cup of bad coffee about Bonnie and her work. He was probably trying to butter me up because he kept praising her as an employee. "She was wonderful," he said enthusiastically. "We would have loved to hire her full-time, but I don't think a doctor's wife needs those hours," he added with satisfaction. I stared at him. I thought Bonnie worked full-time. Trying to hide my surprise, I asked him, "Remind me, Mr. Rogers, how many hours a week did she work here?" "Monday through Friday, 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Every evening, 20 hours a week," he muttered. "She cut her hours in half before your wedding. I think she wanted to spend more time with you in the mornings," he said with a wink. Then he remembered he was talking about a dead woman and stammered an apology. I waved away his apology, thanked him for his help, and headed home with an uneasy feeling in my stomach. Bonnie had always cared about her job. I had told her many times that she didn't need to work, but she insisted. "I need my own money in case you kick me out," she would say with a laugh. And I thought it was just another example of her strong, independent nature. Now it seemed like something else, but I didn't know what. When I got home, I immediately opened the drawer where her bank statements were kept. She had her own account, which she used to pay for gas, lunches at work, and other small expenses. I had always admired her for wanting to be at least partially financially independent from me, but now I thought there must be more to the story. Her bank statements confirmed what Rogers had said. Every month, I saw that her salary was automatically transferred to her account. I checked the statements for the last 2 years. Shortly before our wedding, Bonnie's salary had been cut in half. She never told me about it. I thought I might find some explanation when I looked at her canceled checks, but I didn't find anything unusual, so what was going on? I felt very tired when I returned to my desk. Finding her business card, I called Nicole on her cell phone. "This is Mark Robertson, Nicole. I don't know what's going on, but I think you're up to something." I told her what I had found, and she promised to return to Millersville as soon as she could. Before hanging up, she said, "Don't do anything rash, Mark. Wait until I get there, please." Now I had even more questions than before, and Nicole was the only person I could talk to about them. I knew only one thing. Bonnie was hiding something from me, and although I didn't know what it was, my guesses weren't very pleasant. The day after our last meeting, I got in my car and drove to Arrow Point. I didn't know what I wanted to accomplish, but I felt like I had to do something. The news I had learned the day before was stuck in my head like a worm, and I couldn't sit idly by and let it swarm aimlessly in my brain. The drive to Arrow Point was uneventful. But as I stopped at an intersection, preparing to return to Millersville, I heard someone calling me. Hey Doc, Doc Robertson, can you give me a ride? I turned around in my seat and saw Jared Porter waving his arms and running toward me. Jared was one of my patients, a healthy teenager from a good family. Well, what are you doing in Arapointa, Jared? I asked as he climbed into the front seat next to me. Where's your car? He smiled broadly. I'm dating a girl who lives here in Arapointe. My car's in the shop, and she called and said she was lonely, so I gave her a ride. You know how it is when you miss a girl, he smiled. Then he suddenly realized what he had said and turned pale. Oh my God, Doc, I'm sorry. I was talking about my girlfriend. I wasn't thinking about Mrs. He fell silent, embarrassed. It's okay, Jared, I said gently. I'm just glad I could give you a ride. Your mom would have been worried if you'd been stuck on the highway. He nodded awkwardly, grateful to have avoided further embarrassment. As I drove, we chatted about school and his plans for the future. He made it clear that he wanted to leave Millersville as soon as he could. There's nothing here for me, he said. I hope to go to the University of Oklahoma and live in Norman or Okeechobee City after I graduate. You don't think you'll come back to Millersville, do you? I asked. No way, he replied confidently. All my friends feel the same way. As we talked, I glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed a truck quickly passing us. Soon it moved into the left lane to pass me. The teenager behind the wheel was about the same age as Jared and waved at us cheerfully as he passed. I didn't feel the same friendliness. I was driving 10 miles over the speed limit and the other truck still passed me easily. The thing about Oklahoma roads is that they are visible for miles in many places, and I saw another car approaching us in the distance. To my horror, the truck that had just passed us suddenly swerved into the oncoming lane. A moment later, the oncoming car did the same thing, pulling into my lane, and they flew past each other at 70 miles per hour. Then the car returned to its lane, and as it passed me on the left, I saw the girl's smirking face. Watching what was happening, I instinctively let go of the gas and hit the brakes. With my heart pounding in my chest, I pulled over to the side of the road. Hearing Jared laughing next to me, I turned to him angrily. What the hell was that? I asked. Who, he exclaimed. Heart of the prairie. What are you talking about, Jared? Those two people aren't dead. No, they're fine. Didn't you see them sticking their arms out the window? He asked. He raised his left arm above his head, bent it at the wrist, and pointed it down at a 45-degree angle toward his head. I stared at him in shock. Don't you get it? He asked. He scribbled the following on the dashboard. One driver's left hand goes like this, the other driver's hand goes like this. Connect them, and you get a heart. The heart of the prairies. I looked at him in amazement. Do all people really do that every time they meet on the highway? Oh no, he replied quickly. Not everyone, only people in love. It's a way of saying I love you. I didn't say another word to Jared for the rest of the trip. I couldn't. I was in shock. It was late when I dropped Jared off at his parents' house. When I pulled up to my house, there was a rental car in front of the house with Nicole Claiborne sitting inside with the window rolled down. When she saw me, she smiled broadly, held out a bag and said, I brought you dinner. Then she saw the look on my face and her smile disappeared. When she put the food on the dining room table and we started eating, I told her what I had seen that day and what Jared had said to me. She shook her head in disgust. Never underestimate the stupidity of people, she said. Then a thought flashed through her mind. Oh my God, that's what happened to Bonnie, she exclaimed. She deliberately drove into oncoming traffic, expecting the other driver to do the same. Exactly, I said, only the other driver didn't know that. Because he wasn't the right person, she finished my thought. Then she shuddered. That explains what happened to Bonnie's arm, she said, and I couldn't help imagining what would have happened to an arm in a window at that speed. I pushed the image away and continued. But if Taylor Johnson isn't the right man, then who is? I asked. Nicole beat me to it. That's not the question, she said. The real question is, why did Bonnie think it was him? We stared at each other. The truck, we shouted at the same time. Taylor Johnson was driving the truck that Bonnie thought she recognized. Nicole continued, gasping for breath. She wanted to signal her lover, the heart of the prairie, only it wasn't him. She shook her head sadly. It was a terrible mistake, a stupid accident that shouldn't have happened. When Nicole said the word lover, I felt the pain again, but now there was a new feeling inside me. Anger. But I suppressed it because I needed to know more. So how can we find out which of Bonnie's acquaintances was driving a truck similar to Taylor Johnson's? I asked. I need to check with the Department of Motor Vehicles, she said, and went to get her iPad. When she returned, she was already searching the database. Okay, she said. I found Taylor Johnson's truck registration number. Now we just need to check if it matches any other trucks in the area. Good luck, I said cynically. Everyone has a pickup truck around here. That's true, she said. But we're looking for one that Bonnie would recognize from a distance. What distinctive feature would make her think she was driving past her lover's pickup truck? I tried to think logically, not emotionally. It must be the color, I said. She smiled at me, as if I were the smartest student in her class. Exactly, she said. And you know what? Taylor Johnson's pickup truck was painted a shade of yellow that you don't see very often these days. What's more, according to the DMV, there's only one yellow pickup truck of that make and model in Miller County, and it's registered to Holden Calloway. Who's that? I asked stupidly. Let me check another database and I might be able to tell you, she replied. A moment later, she looked at me triumphantly. According to this database, he's a 28-year-old man living in Arrow Point. Damn, that's Bonnie's age, I said. Give me a minute. I think I know where to find something that might help us. I hid in the attic and, after rummaging around for a while, returned with a book in my hands. I handed it to Nicole. This is Bonnie's yearbook, I said quietly. While she held it on her lap, I flipped through the pages, turning to the graduation photos and scanning the list until I found a picture of Holden Calloway. There he was, a cute, skinny guy with a ridiculous hairstyle and an ill-fitting suit, staring back at us. Well, she asked, looking at the photo. I turned another page and ran my finger across it until I came across a photo of Bonnie. Although she looked so young, I could still see the woman she was meant to become. But that wasn't what caught Nicole's attention. Scrawled beneath the photo were the words, I love you, Bonnie. Heart of the prairies, forever Holden. They were high school sweethearts, Nicole whispered. Maybe it didn't end in high school, I said. Nicole looked at me. But something still doesn't feel right. I would understand if Bonnie had dated Holden Calloway at Arrow Point. But why would she wait for him on his way back from Millersville? She put down the yearbook and picked up her iPad again. When she looked back at me, her eyes widened. I don't understand. This can't be true, she said. It says here that Holden works at the Miller Ranch. We talked late into the night. We learned so much, but there were even more questions that seemed impossible to answer. I sank down on the couch, my head pounding, and turned to Nicole. I'm too tired to think about this tonight. I need to sleep. I looked at her sternly. You can stay if you want. She looked at me intently again. Are you asking me? No, I said. My emotions are still too strong, but right now I feel like my whole life is falling apart and everything I believed in was a lie. It would just be nice to have a friend around if that's not too much to ask. I took the master bedroom and she went to one of the guest rooms. But one night she came into my room and climbed under the covers. I was glad because I really needed someone in this situation full of pain, lies, and betrayal. It seemed like she needed me too, and we held each other like two shipwreck survivors. Eventually, we both fell asleep. The next morning, I was making breakfast when she showed up in the kitchen in her power suit. When I put her plate down, she asked, How are you feeling this morning, Mark? Not very well, I replied honestly. I've gone from being a widower who just lost the woman he loved to a man who has learned that his wife may never have loved him. I'm still torn between grief and anger, and to be honest, I don't know how much more I can take. As she listened, I was touched to see tears in her eyes. So this is what compassion looks like, I thought in amazement. Thank you for staying last night, I said to her. The more I learned about what was going on, the more I felt like I didn't have a single friend in the world. I was very lonely. Your presence helped me. She came over and hugged me. I'm glad I could help, Mark, but you should know that I stayed because I wanted to, not because you needed me. After a minute, I let her go. What are your plans? I asked. Can you stay? No, she replied. I have to go, and it's better to do it before the neighbors start gossiping. It's probably too late, I said, but it doesn't matter. She looked at me intently. What are you going to do, Mark? Don't worry, I assured her. I'm not going to do anything stupid. I just need to get some answers to a few questions. She wanted to say something but changed her mind. I have to get back to Oklahoma City today, she said. Now that we've confirmed that Bonnie's death was accidental, the insurance money will be transferred to your account. I nodded. although under the circumstances, the money meant nothing to me. I'd think about what to do with it later. I'd like to know what you find out, she continued. I mean, when it's all over, I'd really like to, if you want. She trailed off, not knowing what to say. I understand, I said. She looked as if she'd wanted to say something else, but instead she came over to me and kissed me gently on the lips. Good luck, Mark, she said and left. When she left, I felt a twinge in my heart. I was better off with her. But the next step was mine to take, and now the anger I had been holding back began to build. Glancing at my watch again, I made my arrangements and got into the car. I didn't want to risk driving onto the Miller's property, so I parked on the side of the road a couple of miles from the entrance. When I saw the green truck approaching, I started the engine and pulled out in front of it at what seemed like the last safe moment. In an attempt to avoid a collision, he swerved into the ditch. I slowed down in front of his truck so he couldn't easily drive away, then jumped out of the car. He looked at me through the window with surprise, which turned to fear when he recognized me. Get out of the car, Holden, I shouted. Get out, or I'll break the window and drag you out, I repeated, waving the tire iron in my hand. I thought I would have to carry out my threat, but then his shoulders slumped and a look of resignation came over his young face. He opened the door, got out, and slowly walked over to his car. He didn't look like the boy in the school yearbook photo. I was 6 inches taller and 30 pounds heavier. Go ahead, hit me, he said grimly. You can destroy me if you want, I don't care. You can't hurt me more than I've already hurt you. She's gone, and I'll never see her again. I grabbed his arm. I won't hit you unless I have to, I told him. I just need you to come with me and answer a few questions. I led him to the car and pushed him into the passenger seat. He looked indifferent, but I kept the tire iron in my hand so it would be handy if he changed his mind. I jerked the wheel and drove back to Millersville. As soon as we started moving, I turned and looked at him. When did this start? I asked. When did you and her first… He looked at me like I was an idiot. Started? We've always been in love, ever since school. We were going to get married after college, as soon as we had enough money to settle down. But then you came along and started courting her, and her old man said she should be nice to you for the sake of the town. He looked at me defiantly. She tried to refuse. She loved me, not you. Then his eyes lost their fire. But she loved her old man too, and he wouldn't leave her alone, saying it was her duty, that she had to do it if she loved him. She could never say no to her dad, he said bitterly. But she never said no to me either, he said proudly. So her father came up with a solution. I had to live in Arrow Point so that no one would see Bonnie and me together. But he gave me a job at his house, and every morning I would leave very early for the ranch. She would leave town as if she were going to work at Arroyo Point, and then she would come back to the ranch to be with me. But she went to work at Arroyo Point, I objected. I talked to her boss. Of course she did, Holder replied desperately. She had to make it look plausible, but she only worked there during the day and spent the mornings with me. I still don't understand. Why all the trips? Why didn't she just meet you in Arapointa? He shook his head in disgust. Her father said we couldn't be together where people could see us and start gossiping, but I think he just wanted to keep us under control. Then his face took on a contemptuous expression. Her old man was a real loser. As soon as Bonnie left for work, he made me work on the ranch like a dog all day long. But when she left for Millersville in the evening, I would go back to Arrow Point. We would meet on the road and always make a prairie heart to show that we loved each other, even when we were far apart. I looked at him again and saw how suffering had distorted his young face. The night when the accident happened, her father made me work late, doing some stupid chores around the house. I thought I could drive past her closer to Millersville, but she wasn't there. He began to cry openly, tears streaming down his cheeks like water down a drain. I came across the accident about a mile from the river. At first, I didn't recognize who it was. I just knew it was bad. But when I got closer, I recognized her Honda, or what was left of it. The front end was completely smashed, and she was behind the wheel. Oh God, Doc, her arm was torn off. When I called her name, she opened her eyes, looked at me, and smiled. And then she died. He broke down and started sobbing. And even though I hated him as a rival for Bonnie, I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. I'm probably the first person he's ever told this story to, I thought. He's kept it inside all this time. It's amazing he can even function. You put a cross on the highway, I said. He was too upset to respond, but I knew it was true. That's why it says Bonnie Miller instead of Bonnie Robertson, I said, more to myself than to him. After a while, he calmed down a little and started talking again. It seemed like he just needed to get it off his chest. I called 911, but I didn't stay because I didn't want to ruin Bonnie's life. He looked at me with frightened eyes. When I got back to my car, Doc, oh my God, I found her hand. He started crying again. After that, I couldn't get another word out of him. We pulled up to Millersville and I headed straight for the courthouse on the square. I parked the car, walked around it, opened the door and gently asked him to come with me. He didn't resist. I'm not sure he even knew where he was at that point. There was a "in session" sign on the courtroom door, but I opened it anyway. Richard Miller looked at me in surprise, but immediately smiled. Come in, Dr. Robertson. We were just discussing an important matter and would welcome your wise counsel. No, I said. I have an important question for you. For all of you. With that, I turned and invited Holden Calloway to enter. Miller paled when Holden appeared in the doorway, and I found it particularly telling that the others at the table also gasped. They all knew, I thought. They're all in on it. Miller was the first to recover. Listen, Mark. I don't know what this boy has told you, but don't lie to me, Richard, I said sternly. I know the whole story now, every last detail. You were desperately looking for a new doctor in Millersville who would stay this time. You were so desperate that you were willing to sell your own daughter. I paused to look at the others. And any one of you would have done the same thing to your daughter. That's not fair, Miller replied. What father wouldn't want his daughter to marry a good doctor respected in the community and able to provide her with a carefree life? I only wanted happiness for Bonnie. If you really cared about Bonnie's happiness, you would have let her marry the man she truly loves, I said angrily, pointing at Holden. But no, you tried to make her leave him for me. And when she wouldn't, you set Holden up. You made him your mistress and me a cowardly cuckold, and you all knew it. He raised his hands as if to calm me down. Mark, I know you're upset right now, but you have to look at the bigger picture. This town has over 100 years of history. We're trying to preserve the traditions of a small American town, a legacy we want to leave to the next generation. Bullshit, I interrupted. You didn't care about tradition or heritage. All you cared about was keeping the value of your ranch. I turned to the other members of the committee, pointing at them one by one. And you were worried about the value of your car dealership, and you just wanted your assets in the bank to grow, and you were worried about sales at your store. I shook my head. None of you care about your sons and daughters and their future. All you care about is your own assets and how to keep them. But a town without a doctor is a town that's dying, Miller said weakly. You don't understand, I replied harshly. Your town is already dead. It's rotten to the core, just like the morals of its leaders. I can't wait to get out of here. You all make me sick. You can't leave, Miller gasped. If you leave now, you'll owe the government a lot of money. I grinned. The money from the life insurance you bought for Bonnie should cover that debt, I told him. And if there's anything left, Holden Calloway can take the rest. I don't want your blood money. I left them sitting at the table, silent and staring at each other. I went out to my car and checked the trunk to make sure my bags were there, and I hadn't forgotten anything important. Then I headed toward Arroyo Point. As I approached the crash site, I stopped and got out of the car to stand in front of the small, uneven cross one last time. I now understood that Bonnie had never loved me, but I had loved her, and it would take time to come to terms with that. At the same time, I hated her for cheating on me, but I felt sorry that she had to give up the man she truly loved. It would take me a long time to deal with all these conflicting emotions. Maybe Oklahoma City will help me get through this, I thought. I turned the car in that direction and drove onto the long, narrow highway that ran straight through the heart of the prairie. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next video.